The email came in at 4:47 on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus saw it the same moment he saw the other one, the one he'd sent 3 weeks ago that was still sitting in his Outbox's sent folder with no reply attached to it. 2 emails, side by side in his mind. The one nobody had answered, and the new one from Derek that said, "Hey, running into a snag with the Callaway deck. Any chance you can take a look tonight? Presentation's tomorrow at 9. Marcus read it twice. He set his phone face down on his desk. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. He looked at his monitor. He had 40 minutes of his own work left, work he'd been pushing to the end of the day all week, because the beginning of the day kept filling up with other people's things. 40 minutes, and then if he left at the normal time, he'd still get home before 8, which hadn't happened on a Thursday in recent memory. He looked at Derek's email. He thought about saying no. He thought about what saying no would produce. The follow-up message, the slight pressure, the thing where Derek would mention it to Lisa, and Lisa would mention it casually to Marcus like she was on nobody's side. And the air in the office would have a particular quality for the next few days that Marcus had learned to dread more than the extra hours. He picked up his phone. He started typing. He stopped. He put the phone down again. He sat there for a moment in the quiet of a nearly empty office floor, the hum of the HVAC and the distant sound of the elevator and his own breathing, and he thought, I am so tired. Not of Derek's email specifically, not of the Callaway deck, of the long, accumulated, deeply familiar weight of being the person who says yes when everyone already knows the answer before they ask. He sat there. He did not pick up the phone. Some stories are about a big moment. This one is about a small moment that took 4 years to arrive. If you've ever been the person that everyone counts on and nobody actually sees, this channel is for you. Subscribe before we keep going. Marcus Webb had been at Halford Communications for 4 years, which, in the specific economy of a 12-person marketing firm, was long enough to become the institutional memory, the reliable center, the person who knew where the files were and how the client portal worked, and which version of the brand guidelines was actually current. He was 34. He had a desk by the window that he'd ended up with not by seniority, but because he was the last one in the office most evenings, and the window seat had light until late. He had a system for his files that other people borrowed without asking, and occasionally broke. He made good coffee and kept the kitchen in a condition that did not require anyone to send a passive-aggressive all-staff email, which happened 3 times a year regardless. He was, by the informal metrics of office life, excellent. The formal metrics were less clear. His title was Senior Content Strategist, which was accurate in that he was senior and did strategy and produced content, and was misleading in the way that job titles at small firms are often misleading, because it didn't capture the additional category of things he also did, which included checking other people's work before it went out, fixing other people's errors after they went out, explaining processes that had been explained before, and staying late to cover for situations that were not his situations. He'd been doing this since approximately month 3. In month 3, a project manager named Jess had panicked about a deliverable that was due the next morning, and she'd gotten stuck in the data, and someone had suggested Marcus might be able to help. And Marcus, who was new and wanted to be useful and genuinely didn't mind, had stayed until 11 and helped her get it done. Jess had been genuinely grateful. She brought him a coffee the next morning and said he was a lifesaver. He'd liked the way that felt. He would later understand that the way it felt had been the beginning of something. By month 6, the requests had a slightly different quality. Les, is there any chance you could help with this? And more, do you think you could take a look at this tonight? The phrasing was still polite. The expectation underneath was less tentative. By year 2, The expectation had organized itself into something that operated like a policy, except it wasn't written down and nobody had agreed to it. Marcus was the person who handled things when things needed handling. This was just how the office worked. It was as structural as the fact that Derek handled client calls and Lisa ran the Tuesday all-hands, and the printer on the second floor jammed if you used the manual feed. Marcus was aware of this. He wasn't oblivious. He saw the shape of it. He'd thought about it on the commute home, on evenings when he'd gotten in late and stood on the platform waiting for the train with the specific exhaustion of someone who had done a full day's work that included a significant amount of someone else's work. But every time he reached the point of doing something about it, he'd run into the same set of internal obstacles. First, he didn't want to make it awkward. The office was 12 people. 12 people was a family-sized group, which meant the social temperature mattered in a specific and immediate way. He had to be there tomorrow and the day after, and he'd learned that the person who creates friction in a small office carries that friction for a long time. Second, he wasn't sure what he'd even say. He didn't have a dramatic grievance. Nobody had done anything outrageous. The pattern had assembled itself from small, individually reasonable requests, and it was hard to point at any single one and call it the problem. Third, and this was the one he looked at least, he needed to be needed. He wasn't proud of this. It wasn't something he'd have said out loud. But it was there, honest and quiet, underneath the professional reasons. The fact was that being the person who solved things had become part of how Marcus understood his own value. If he stopped solving things, he'd have to reckon with the question of what he was worth without the solving. And he wasn't sure the answer would feel good. So he stayed. He helped. He said yes, or said nothing, which functioned the same way. He smiled when people thanked him, with the phrasing that had started to feel like a form letter. "You're a lifesaver, Marcus. I don't know what we'd do without you." And he told himself this was fine, that the trade was worth it, that belonging to a place meant contributing to it, that this was just who he was. He was who he was in this office because he'd allowed himself to become who they needed him to be, which was not quite the same thing. Derek's Callaway situation was not a new situation. It was a variation on a recurring situation. Derek handled the client relationship with Callaway Manufacturing, which was the firm's largest account and had been for 2 years. Derek was good at the relationship part. He had the kind of easy, personable confidence that clients liked, the ability to make a meeting feel both productive and pleasant, which was a real skill. What he was less good at was the follow-through part. The materials, the specifications, the deck that had to accurately represent what had been discussed in the meeting and what was being proposed, and what the timeline and deliverables were. Marcus had been quietly backstopping Derek's Callaway work for over a year. Not all of it. Derek was capable of producing the work. But the final check, the night before cleanup, the finding of the slide that had the wrong numbers from 3 versions ago, the reformatting that happened when Derek had been in back-to-back client calls and hadn't had time to do it right. That part landed on Marcus with the reliability of weather. The thing that made tonight different was not the request. The thing that made tonight different was the 3-week-old email sitting in Marcus's sent folder. He'd sent it on a Tuesday, 3 weeks ago, to Lisa, their director, about a project he'd been developing, a content framework he'd been building on his own time, a structure for how the firm could approach a specific type of client brief that they kept handling inconsistently. He'd spent 6 weeks on it. It was good work. He knew it was good work. He was objective enough about his own output to know the difference. He'd sent it with a note saying he'd love to find time to walk through it when she had a chance. She hadn't answered. He'd followed up once, gently, a week later. She'd replied with, "Looks interesting. Swamped right now, but let's find time." And then time had not been found. He sat at his desk in the quiet office with Derek's email on his phone and his sent folder in his head, and something that had been building for 4 years arrived at a point that felt like a question requiring an answer. He picked up the phone. He typed, "I won't be able to get to this tonight. I've got something I need to finish. Good luck with the presentation." He looked at it. He sent it. He put the phone face down. His hands had a slight tremor, which surprised him. His heart was doing something he didn't expect. Not guilt, or not only guilt, something else. Something that had been waiting to feel like something for a long time and had finally found the shape. He turned back to his monitor and did the 40 minutes of his own work. He left at 5:30. He took the train home. He stood on the platform in the evening air, which was the cool air of mid-October, and he waited with the other commuters and watched the tracks and thought about what he'd done and whether he was going to regret it. He thought, "I probably am, and I think I'm going to do it anyway." The train came. He got on. He looked out the window at the city going past and thought about the response that was likely coming and what he would say to it, and thought about the meeting tomorrow morning, and thought about the face Derek would make when he walked in, and the thing Lisa would say to him, or not say, which was sometimes worse. He thought about the content framework sitting in his sent folder, unanswered. He thought, "I gave them the version of me that was useful, and that became the version that was expected, and somewhere in there the rest of me got filed under, not urgent, will address later." He looked at his reflection in the dark window of the train. He thought, later never came. The office the next morning had a quality. Not dramatic. Nothing in this office was dramatic, which was actually part of the issue. The quality was more like a slight adjustment in the atmosphere, the way a room feels when a conversation has happened that not everyone was part of. Derek had gotten someone else to fix the Callaway deck. Marcus learned this from the printer tray, which had a copy of the revised version sitting in it when he arrived, a version that was noticeably rougher than what it would have been if Marcus had touched it. Derek didn't say anything to Marcus directly. He said good morning with the particular precision of a person who is being professionally civil while processing something privately, and then went into his office. Lisa stopped by Marcus's desk at 9:15. "Hey," she said, "you have a minute?" "Sure," Marcus said. She sat in the chair across from his desk. She had the expression she got when she was going to manage something. Organized, forward-facing, the expression of someone who was going to have a conversation and had the shape of it pre-planned. "Derek mentioned he reached out last night," she said. "He did," Marcus said, "and you weren't able to help." "I had my own work to finish," Marcus said. "Okay." She nodded in a way that was accepting the information and also not entirely accepting it. "I know it's not the first time he's asked last minute. That's something I'm working on with him." A pause. "The Callaway account is our biggest client. The presentation this morning is significant." "I know," Marcus said. "So I just want to understand, was there something specific going on, or was it more of a general—" "I had work I needed to finish," Marcus said again. "My own work, which I did." She looked at him. "I sent you a proposal 3 weeks ago," he said, "the content framework." A brief pause. "I remember," she said. "I followed up once. I haven't heard back." "I've been swamped, Marcus." "I told you." "I know," he said. "I'm not saying it's a priority. I'm saying it's been 3 weeks, and it's work I did on my own time because I thought it had value, and I haven't heard anything." And last night I had something I needed to finish for myself, and I made a choice to finish it. He paused. That's what happened. Lisa held his eye. He could feel the thing he'd felt on the train last night, the tremor under the surface, the thing that wanted to walk back the whole conversation and say, "Never mind, I'll help next time." He held it. "I'll look at the framework this week," she said. "Thank you," he said. "And I'll talk to Derek about the pattern." "I appreciate that," he said. She stood up. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was trying to classify what was happening. Was this Marcus being difficult? Was this Marcus burning out? Was this Marcus having a problem? He could see her working through the categories and not quite finding the right one, because she didn't have a category for Marcus decided his own work mattered. She went back to her office. Marcus turned to his monitor. His hands were steadier this morning. The new hire had started 6 weeks ago. Her name was Priya, and she sat 2 desks over in the open plan space. And she had the particular quality of someone who arrives at a place and pays attention before she speaks, which in an office full of people who were constantly speaking was relatively unusual. She'd been quiet for the first month, watching, learning the shape of things, asking targeted questions and listening to the answers. Marcus had noticed her noticing. He'd thought a few times that she was watching the pattern he was part of. He hadn't known what to make of that. On the Tuesday after the Derek situation, she came to his desk at lunch. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure," he said. She sat in the chair. She'd brought her lunch, a sandwich from the place 2 blocks over that several of them went to regularly. She ate a bite of it and looked at him. "I've been here 6 weeks," she said. "I know," he said. "And I've been watching how the work actually moves," she said. "Not the org chart, how the work actually moves." "Okay," he said. "You do a significant amount of work that doesn't belong to you," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. "Other people's errors, other people's overdue tasks. You clean things up quietly, and then those people present the clean version, and nobody notes the difference." She ate another bite of her sandwich. "I've watched it happen 4 times in 6 weeks, maybe more that I didn't catch." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a reasonable observation," he said. "I'm not trying to create a thing," she said. "I'm just asking why you let it happen." He looked at his desk, at the files organized in the system that other people borrowed and occasionally broke. "It's complicated," he said. "It usually is," she said. "I'm still asking." He looked at her. She was eating her sandwich and looking at him with the directness of someone who asked questions because she wanted answers, not because she wanted a particular answer. "I didn't want to make it awkward," he said. "The not doing it is also awkward," she said. "You just absorb the awkward instead of sharing it." He sat with this. "And the other thing," she said, "is that I think people stopped seeing it as a favor and started seeing it as just your job. Or like a property of you, like the way the printer on 2 jams when you use the manual feed." He blinked. "The printer analogy," he said. "It's how it reads from the outside," she said. "Not something you chose. Just something that happens." He looked at the window. October light, the trees outside doing their late fall thing. "I know," he said. "So why haven't you said anything?" He thought about the honest answer. "Because saying something means either it changes or it doesn't," he said. "If it changes, fine. If it doesn't, then I've said the thing and it didn't matter, and I still have to be in this office the next day knowing it didn't matter." He paused. The not saying was protective. Protective of what? Of not having to know, he said. Whether it would matter. Priya held her sandwich and looked at him. That's fair, she said. But also, you've been in this office 4 years. You're not going to have clarity on what you're worth here without asking for it, and not asking has its own cost. I know, he said. Do you? She said, not unkindly, just precisely. He looked at her. I'm starting to, he said. She finished her sandwich. She gathered the wrapper. The Callaway thing last Thursday, she said. I heard about it. Everyone heard about it. You said no. I said no, he said. Good, she said. She stood up. I'm not telling you what to do, she said. I've been here 6 weeks, and you've been here 4 years, and you know this place better than I do. I just thought it might be useful to hear that from the outside it looks like a man who's been very politely disappearing into other people's problems for a long time. She held his eye. You're pretty good at your actual job, from what I've seen. She went back to her desk. Marcus sat there. He turned back to his monitor. He looked at the screen. He looked at the open document that was his own work, a thing he'd been making time for gradually, unevenly, in the spaces that didn't get claimed by other things. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he sent Lisa a calendar invite. Subject line: Content Framework, 30 minutes, your availability. He put Thursday at 2 p.m. as the proposed time. He went back to work. If you've ever had someone name something that was happening to you before you'd found the word for it, leave something in the comments below. Tell me what you would have done differently. Sometimes it's clearer from the outside. Sometimes the outside view is the thing that finally makes it real. The meeting happened on Thursday. Lisa came to it with a framework printed, which was something. She'd put notes in the margins. Not many, but real ones. The kind that meant she'd actually read it rather than skimmed. She sat across from him at the small conference table with the notes visible and said, "This is good." He waited. "I mean that," she said. "I should have said it 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry I didn't." "Thank you," he said. "I want to talk about how to use it, how to build it into the workflow." She looked at the printed pages. "There are some things I'd push back on, but the core of it is solid." They talked for 40 minutes. She pushed back on 2 things. He explained his reasoning on one and conceded on the other. By the end, they had a rough plan for piloting it on the next mid-size brief that came in. He walked back to his desk. He wasn't sure what he felt. Not vindication. It wasn't that. Something quieter. The feeling of work he'd done on his own time being seen as work rather than noise. The feeling of a conversation that was actually about the thing it was supposed to be about. He'd been waiting for that feeling for a while. He hadn't known how much he was waiting for it. The all-hands meeting happened on the following Monday. Lisa ran the all-hands on Tuesdays as a rule, but she'd moved it to Monday for reasons of a client deadline the previous week. 12 people in the conference room, the usual mix of attention and phones face down that marked the first 15 minutes before everyone adjusted to being in the same room. There was an item on the agenda that Marcus had requested. He'd asked Lisa to add it, which was unusual. Typically, the agenda was hers to set. She'd asked what it was about. He'd said he wanted to talk about workflow. She'd looked at him for a moment and then added it. They got through the first items: Client updates, deadline calendar, a new software rollout that nobody was excited about. Then Lisa said, Marcus had something he wanted to raise. 12 faces. Some curious. Derek's face doing the specific thing it had been doing for the past 10 days, a careful neutrality. Marcus had thought about this. He hadn't rehearsed a speech. He decided against a speech because a speech was the wrong format for what he needed to say. He'd thought about what was actually true and how to say it plainly. I want to talk about how we handle it when a project runs into trouble close to a deadline, he said. He looked at the room. Not at Derek specifically, just at the room. I've noticed a pattern over the past couple of years where last-minute problems get redirected to me to fix. Not always. Sometimes that's appropriate because it's my area. But sometimes it's not my area, and it's not my error, and I take it on anyway because there's a deadline and someone asks, and it seems like the fastest solution. The room was quiet. I want to name that pattern, he said, because I think it's been invisible, not out of malice. I don't think anyone made a conscious decision to set things up this way, but it's set up anyway. And I'd like to set it up differently. He paused. The pausing was harder than the talking. He wanted to fill the silence with qualifications with, I hope this doesn't come across wrong, and I know everyone's busy, and the soft cushioning that he'd been using his whole time here to make difficult things easier to receive. He held the pause. What I'm proposing is simple, he said. When there's a problem that requires someone to stay late or take on additional work, the conversation should include, whose error was this? What's the fair way to handle it? And what can we do to prevent it next time? Not just, who's available to absorb it? He looked at Lisa. She held his eye. I think that's reasonable, she said. Not immediately. She let a beat pass, which was the right thing to do, because an immediate response would have felt like management rather than agreement. I'd like to talk about how we built that into our process. Derek said, I think there's a way to read this that's pointed. The room adjusted slightly. I'm not pointing at anyone specifically, Marcus said. I'm describing a pattern. The timing is what it is, Derek said. The timing is when I decided to say something, Marcus said. I could have said it 6 months ago. I should have said it 6 months ago. The fact that I didn't doesn't make the thing less true. Derek looked at the table. The room was quiet again. Marcus sat with the quiet. He'd been afraid of this quiet, the specific, uncomfortable quiet of 12 people in a room with a thing that nobody had named before. He'd been afraid of what it would feel like to have caused it. It felt uncomfortable. It didn't feel wrong. I want to be clear about something, Marcus said. I'm not trying to stop helping. I like helping. I'm good at it. I want to be useful here. He paused. I just want the helping to be a choice I make, not something that got filed under, Marcus handles this. He stopped. He looked at the room. Priya was looking at him with the specific expression of someone who has said something privately and is watching it be said publicly, and the experience of seeing the thing said out loud has its own quality. A woman named Beth, who ran the production side and had been in the office almost as long as Marcus, said, For what it's worth, I think this is overdue. It's not a complaint meeting, Marcus said. I'm not looking to assign blame. I'm looking to name something and see if we can do it differently going forward. Lisa said, I want to take this seriously. I think we can build some of this into how we triage when things go sideways. She looked at the room. I'd like everyone to think about this before next Monday's all hands, and we'll come back to it with some actual process suggestions. The meeting moved on. There were 3 more agenda items. They got through them with a slightly altered air of people who've had a thing said in their presence and are processing it while also doing the work of the remaining items. Marcus drove home after. He stopped at the grocery store on the way. He bought the ingredients for the pasta he liked to make when he had energy. Not the quick version, but the actual one that took 45 minutes and produced something worth the time. He drove home with the groceries. He stood in his kitchen and made the pasta. He thought about the meeting. He thought about Derek's face during the silence. He thought about Beth saying, "This is overdue," which had been unexpected and had landed somewhere specific inside him. The warmth of a thing being confirmed by someone who'd been watching longer than you realized. He thought about the part where it hadn't been comfortable. He thought, I'd been protecting everyone else's comfort and calling it being a good colleague. He made the pasta. He ate it at his kitchen table with the news on low in the background. It was good. The real version was always better than the quick version. He sat there after and didn't do anything for a while, which was an unusual thing for him to allow himself. He thought about what Priya had said, a man who's been very politely disappearing into other people's problems. He thought, I've been here 4 years and I produced a body of work in that time, and most of it is in other people's deliverables. He thought, I'd like the next 4 years to look different. The weeks after the meeting were not easy in the simple way. Derek took a while to recalibrate. Not dramatically. There wasn't a confrontation, no real scene. But there was a period of about 2 weeks where the quality of Derek's good mornings had a professional precision that communicated something underneath the politeness. Marcus was aware of it. He decided to let it run its course rather than manage it, which was itself a new position for him. Usually he would have done something to smooth the friction, apologized for an implication, softened the situation back toward comfort. He didn't do that. He just continued doing his work. He continued being good at it. He continued helping when it made sense and when it was his area. He let the other stuff find its appropriate owner. Something else happened in that period. Something smaller and harder to quantify. He started finishing his own work at his own desk during his own hours. This sounds obvious stated plainly. It was not obvious in practice. It required a daily series of small decisions, noticing when he was about to extend himself into someone else's problem that wasn't his to solve, pausing, considering whether it was actually his to solve, and making a choice rather than a reflex. He got better at it, slowly. It wasn't a clean transformation. There were days he absorbed something out of habit and only noticed afterward, and he'd sit with the noticing and think about what he'd do differently next time. He was accumulating data on himself in a way he hadn't before. The content framework got piloted on a mid-size brief in November. It worked well enough that Lisa expanded it to 2 more projects. She gave Marcus credit in the team meeting where she presented the results, not in an excessive way, but in the specific way of someone attributing work correctly. Marcus built this, and here's how it's landing. It was a different experience from the usual. He sat with it and let it be real. Priya stopped by his desk one afternoon in November. "How's it going?" she said. "Better," he said. "Differently, at least." "Derek seems less weird," she said. "Yeah," he said. It faded. "People usually come around when the friction is consistent," she said. "It's inconsistent friction that's destabilizing. Consistent friction just becomes the new normal." He looked at her. "You've done this before," he said. "Not exactly this," she said, "but I've been in rooms where the dynamic was off and someone named it." It usually lands eventually. Usually, he said. Usually, she agreed. Not always. He looked at the window. The November outside was grey and final, the trees stripped, the sky the color of a thought you're not done having. Can I tell you something? He said. Sure, she said. When you asked me why I let it happen, that conversation, I've thought about it a lot. She waited. I said it was because I didn't want to know whether it would matter, he said. But that wasn't the whole thing. What was the rest? He looked at the window. The rest was that being useful was how I knew I was here, he said. It doesn't sound strange, she said. It sounds like I was doing it for myself, he said. As much as for them. Maybe more. Yeah, she said. Probably both things are true. He looked at her. That doesn't make it okay, he said. What they were doing. No, she said. Both things can be true, and one of them can still be not okay. He nodded. I just wanted to say that part, he said. Because the meeting was about them, and there was a part that was about me that I didn't say there. She held his eye. You needed to be needed, she said. Yeah. And you made yourself so needed that they stopped thinking of it as something you chose, she said. Yeah. She nodded. That's a common way for this to go, she said. Doesn't mean you caused it, but it helped it happen. I know, he said. She stood up to go back to her desk. Marcus, she said. He looked at her. You're not just useful, she said, for what it's worth from someone who's been here 3 months. She went back to her desk. He sat there. He turned back to his monitor. He had something he'd been working on, a document that was entirely his, a proposal for a new approach to a type of brief they handled inconsistently. He'd been building it slowly, in his own hours, with the care he applied to things that mattered to him. It was not finished. It was good, partially finished work. He opened it. He kept going. There are a specific kind of people who hold the rope in every office. You know who they are. They're not always the loudest or the most visible. They're usually the ones who respond when you reach out close to a deadline, who catch the thing before it goes out wrong, who know where the old files are and how the process actually works, rather than how it's supposed to work on the flowchart. They're good at the catching. They've been doing it long enough that they're very good, and the catching, when it works well and never fails and never produces a conversation about the catching, gradually stops being something they're choosing to do and becomes something that happens. Like the printer jamming, a property of the environment. Marcus had been a property of the environment for 4 years. He hadn't done anything dramatic to change it. There was no scene where he flipped a table or delivered a speech that everyone applauded. There was an email he didn't answer on a Thursday afternoon, and a meeting where he said something true, and a series of daily decisions that were smaller and harder and more consistent than any single moment. The office didn't transform. Derek was still Derek. The workload was still uneven in the casual way workloads are uneven in 12-person firms. There were still weeks when Marcus stayed late, weeks when he helped on things that weren't strictly his, weeks when the old reflexes pulled harder than the new ones. But the difference was this. When he helped now, he knew he was choosing to. He could feel the choice. He could locate it, name it, do it consciously rather than automatically. He was there because he decided to be there, not because the decision had been made for him years ago and never revisited. It sounds small. It was the whole thing, his commute home on a Friday in December, the train, the platform, the city going past in the dark. He'd left at 5:45, which was not the earliest he'd left, but earlier than most Fridays. He had plans, not big plans, just the kind that involve a particular pizza place he liked, and a thing he'd been meaning to watch for 2 months, and the particular luxury of arriving home when there's still evening left in it. He stood on the platform with his hands in his pockets. He thought about the 4 years, about the version of the office where he'd been a property of the environment, about the content framework in his sent folder, unanswered for 3 weeks, and what it had taken for him to say something about it. He thought about the fact that the framework was now being used on 3 active projects, and that his name was attached to it in a way that meant it was his. He thought, I was doing good work the whole time. I was just handing it to other rooms. The train came. He got on. He sat by the window and watched the city go past. He thought about the new proposal he was building. He thought about what it would look like when it was finished and what he'd do with it. He thought about the conversation with Priya and the word she'd used, disappearing, and how accurately it had named something he hadn't had a word for. He thought, I was disappearing, and I was doing it to avoid a discomfort that was already there, just distributed differently. On me, in full, instead of on the room where it belonged. He thought, the room can handle some of it. He watched the stations go past, the familiar markers, this stop, that stop, the one where the light always seems worse than the others because of how the platform is oriented. He knew this commute the way you know the things you do every day. Every detail of it so familiar it had become invisible. He thought, I'd like to become visible to myself before I become invisible to everyone else. He got off at a stop. He walked home through the cold. The pizza place was exactly where he'd left it. The evening was still enough. He sat at a small table by the window with his food and looked out at the street and thought about nothing specific, which was a thing he was getting better at allowing. He thought about the office. He thought about Priya asking, why do you let it happen? And himself sitting with the question, and the train ride home, and the email he'd sent that Thursday afternoon before he'd had time to talk himself out of it. He thought about the answer he'd given Priya, that he needed to know he was needed, that the usefulness was the form his belonging took. And he thought about what it would mean to belong to a place differently, not through absorbing, not through being the net that caught everything before it hit the floor, but through the actual work, the work he was building on his own, the content framework and the proposal and the accumulated specific knowledge that was his and had been his all along and had mostly been filing itself under other people's names. He thought, I knew where I was worth something. I just kept putting that thing in other people's hands. He finished his pizza. He walked home. He sat on his couch with the thing he'd been meaning to watch for 2 months. He watched it. Afterward, he sat there in the quiet of his apartment with the city sounds coming through the window. A distant horn, someone's music, the ordinary evening sounds of a city not paying any particular attention. And he thought about what he wanted the next 4 years to look like. He didn't have a fully formed answer. That was okay. He was getting used to sitting with the not yet answered, and trusting that the answer would come if he stopped filling the space with other people's emergencies. He thought about the proposal on his desktop, the thing he was building for himself. He thought about finishing it, about what he'd do with it when it was finished. He thought, I'm going to find out. He went to bed at a reasonable hour. He slept. If you've ever spent years making yourself indispensable in ways that slowly disappeared the parts of you that had nothing to do with being useful, leave something in the comments. You don't have to have figured it out. You just have to recognize the shape of it. Sometimes that's the beginning of something. Sometimes just naming it is the whole point. And sometimes the point is this: knowing the difference between helping because you chose to and helping because you forgot you had a choice. One of those builds something, the other just builds a pile. And one day you'll look at the pile and realize it doesn't have your name on it. Marcus had 4 years of that pile. He was starting to build something else.